And welcome back to This Week. I'm pleased to be joined by the first place finisher in the recent mayoral election, Metro Council member and mayoral candidate for the runoff election, Freddie O'Connell. Congratulations on making the runoff.
Bob, thanks so much.
Nice showing, 27% there with 13 candidates. That's a nice showing.
Appreciated earning the most votes of any candidate in that race.
Obviously, the race with 12 people is different than the race now with 2 people.
Very much so.
How does that change your approach with 20 days or so left into this campaign?
So I think for us, one of the things that we could see in conversations that we were having with voters across Nashville is that most candidates were kind of moving in the same direction. And so I think now we've looked at not just building a coalition, but building a consensus. And that's why we're delighted to have public support now from previous competitors, all of whom were friends along the way. Jim Gingrich, Matt Wiltshire, Senators Jeff Yarborough and Heidi Campbell, and I think they'll be joined today by Property Assessor Vivian Wilhoit.
I think you'll agree this has become a real choice election. She's a conservative, you're a progressive, she's a woman, you're a man, all kinds of different choices. But does that make it easier to express yourself, to show yourself, and to show the difference of the contrast?
No, I think throughout the race, again, you could see many of us were putting forward a vision that was forward-looking and optimistic. I would say on the other side, we've seen a vision that's a little darker, a little more, pessimistic about the current state of the city. And while I think a lot of us were looking at this as somewhat of a changed election. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been talking, as you know, about trying to return to an idea of a Nashville for Nashvillians. I think that's what I hope voters pay attention to it more is maybe less the, hey, what is the partisan binary of this race, and more who's prepared to do the job? What are their actual priorities? What have they said about the things that matter most to Nashvillians?
While it hasn't come directly from your opponent's campaign, PAC money has entered in, negative ads have entered in. There's an ad of supporters of Alice Rowley that challenges you on LPRs, on funding for police, on charter schools. Your response to the ad, your response to the direction where it goes?
I gotta say, it's a little disappointing. We've had a handful of conversations so far since the general election that have actually been, I would say, polite and productive. And so to have money coming in from outside Nashville, trying to paint a picture. And in fact, it's almost amusing if it weren't frustrating to hear an ad that calls me a lying politician, when in fact, the example that they're using in that ad was something I was trying to do from a fiscal responsibility standpoint to ensure that a budget that council passed when we were experiencing the largest property tax rate increase in the history of Metro actually would be no greater than what the mayor was proposing, and my amendment failed.
Let's talk a little bit about LPRs. The Metro Council just moved it from a 6-month pilot program to a permanent program. You voted against this. The police like it. They say it helps them with their enforcement, finding stolen cars and the like. Opponents are concerned that it could be used to target minority neighborhoods. It could be used, the information could be released. What is your concern? And if you're elected as mayor, the program's in place, how will you look it over?
Right, so I think, Bob, you just hinted at it. We've seen a little bit we know it's a useful tool. We know it's been applied elsewhere. I expect we can use it responsibly here in Nashville. I think what we didn't do in the space of that pilot period was try to understand and accommodate some of those community concerns. As somebody whose entire professional background is software databases and internet technology, I have actually had to work on systems where you have to carefully consider what it means when you start capturing large amounts of data, especially personally identifiable information. What I've likened it to is if we don't build in stronger guardrails, I'm a law-abiding citizen, and yet it's not like I want all of my personal appointments, particularly health-related things that are related to our family, where we are going for meetings, schools, any of those things. I wouldn't want a patrol car with a dash cam following up my every movement. But if you cast too large a net with no guardrails and that data is captured, unauthorized actors can access that data, and suddenly you can track the movements of hundreds of thousands of Nashvillians very clearly.
Freddie O'Connell, national mayoral candidate. Our conversation continues when This Week continues. Stay with us. Welcome back to This Week in my conversation with national mayoral candidate Freddie O'Connell. I want you to talk about this a little bit in regards to how you might operate as mayor. Being the mayor of everybody in Nashville, even folks who maybe oppose you. A couple of business members downtown, Nashville business guys, they ran ads against you in the primary that were not flattering. And I know that you personally approached at least one of these individuals and said, listen, if I'm mayor, we need to work together, and have been able to work, maybe there's still differences, but a working relationship. Why is that important? Why was that important to reach out maybe even before the election results?
The same reason that I think it's been important, again, to come back to that idea of consensus building. I think it's why you've seen since the general election, we've had support from business organizations like the Nashville Business Coalition, as well as labor organizations like the Central Labor Council. This is the time to build Nashville's best future together. And I think in my 20 years plus of observing mayors moving from the cheap seats to the front row, the model works best when the mayor is partner in chief. And so this means we shouldn't have some parties going to the state pursuing interests that are different than the city. We should be working together as a city, expressing a collection of shared priorities, getting to the broadest consensus possible, and looking for the most successful partnership with the state, with the region.
Can you do that with the state when there are folks up in the supermajority who, when asked about the mayor's race, basically said, anybody but Freddie? I mean, obviously the state and Metro have to work together if you win this election. How do you do that?
So I'll say it this way. For 8 years now, starting in 2015, when I sought election to the Metro Council, we have had a bipartisan base of not just donors, but voters. We've had very productive conversations, even in my terms as Metro Council member, with leadership in both houses of both chambers of the General Assembly, with the governor's office. I expect those conversations to broaden and continue. I will say, even against frustrating backdrops of historic interactions between state and local, I'm cautiously optimistic that the long-term relationships that I've had with Republicans who work at and around the state legislature and around the governor's office are going to be to the city's benefit.
State funding formula for education has changed how money comes to the city. It now follows the student. Every time a student leaves Metro, the money goes with it. Total dollars, Metro receives less money. Nashville citizens pay more in taxpayers than anybody else to fund public schools. How do you make up for that lost money? Your feeling about charter schools in regards to taking away funds from Metro Nashville public schools?
Yeah, and so I think here we're looking at, this is a great example of where we need to figure out how we work more successfully with the state. The state is pursuing three things that put pressure on our local funding formula for schools. They are, as you mentioned, that state funding formula. They have a program of state authorized charters that are not approved here locally, and they have this program of vouchers known as education savings accounts. All of those, to your point, drain money out of other traditional public schools. I will say, I think Metro Schools has a great model of allowing parents to be involved in the decision about where to send their schools, both with zone options, with open enrollment scenarios, with locally approved charter schools. And I think we got to a pretty good equilibrium. You've seen this week, Metro Schools announced TVAS Level 5, the Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, is putting our performance for the second year in a row higher than anywhere else in the state. This is good news for students. This is good news for Metro Schools. What we've seen, unfortunately, since COVID arrived in Nashville is enrollment declines. And some of it was frustrations, which frankly our family experienced with distance learning policies. We have stuck it out. Our daughters are both thriving in their respective public elementary and middle schools. And what we need to do now to somewhat combat that funding loss, we've lost even more funding than that because our enrollment has declined. If we see our enrollment numbers come back up, and that's going to require leadership on my part, the part of the mayor's office. We've had great support from the Metro Council, where we've had so many of my colleagues have their children in our public school system. It's going to take the school board, the director of schools, individual school communities rallying together to say, hey, come join our amazing school community. There's a festival coming up at Nissan Stadium in a few weeks that I hope people will take advantage of to come experience all of the excellence that is there in Metro Schools. Now, we can't take our foot off the gas on the side of high expectations and strong accountability measures either. That's how we're going to keep those enrollment figures up. But getting enrollment up is one of the quickest ways to get more state funding.
Minute left in the show. Talk a little bit about smart transit and also ask What do you want us to tell voters about Freddie O'Connell?
Sure. So smart transit, we've got a comprehensive transportation plan that we worked on with Mayor Cooper. It will cover everything from bridges and culverts, state of good repair on other roadways, traffic management centers that use new technology, and then also traditional transit, starting with buses. We're going to have a big conversation about how we advance one of the biggest missing ingredients for a major American city, which is transit. I expect to work hard on that as mayor. I would encourage voters to not miss this election. Early voting starts Friday, August 25th. Polls are open Saturday. They will stay open early voting, all early voting locations through September 9th. If you miss the early voting, September 14th is election day. This election matters. It's how we're going to build a Nashville for Nashvillians. You can check us out at readyforfreddie.com.
Freddie O'Connell, mayoral candidate. Appreciate your time and your insights.
Bob,
Stay with
thanks.
us. This Week continues in a moment. I want to thank you for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. I do want to thank my guests, Nashville mayoral candidate Freddie O'Connell. Thank you for your time. We'll see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week. Between now and then, you have a great week.